Welcome to the Mad Genius Thesis. I'm so glad you could all join us today for our deep dive into a question that's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
Oh, definitely.
Is there a link between creativity and mental illness?
Yeah, like that whole tortured artist thing we always hear about, right?
Exactly. You know, it's a compelling idea, isn't it?
It really is, and it's not just something we're thinking about now. This idea has been around for centuries, like way back.
That's what makes this whole thing so intriguing. We're going to go way back to ancient Greece,
Oh, wow.
all the way to modern times, tracing the evolution of this concept.
That's a big span of time. How are we going to do that?
Well, we've got a fantastic guide for our exploration, Harvey Ferguson's book, Melancholy and the Critique of Modernity, Søren Kierkegaard's Religious Psychology.
That sounds like a heavy read.
I know, right? I have to admit, when I first picked it up, I was a bit intimidated.
Yeah, me too.
But then I stumbled upon this line from Søren Kierkegaard's journals that Ferguson quotes, "All existence makes me anxious." And suddenly, it all clicked for me.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
It is. This idea of anxiety, this kind of unease, somehow intertwined with creativity. It's like a thread that runs through this whole concept's history.
And Ferguson does such a great job of tracing how this idea of melancholy, the sense of unease, has changed over time. Like, what we once thought of as sorrow without a cause is now a reflection of, well, it's a reflection of how we see the modern world.
The modern world and its anxieties. I like
Yeah.
that. Okay, so to kick things off, let's travel back in time all the way to ancient Greece. They already had this idea of a melancholic genius, right?
Absolutely. They even had, like, a biological explanation for it. They believed that black bile, one of the four humors, was responsible for profound thoughts, but also, in extreme cases, madness.
So they saw this darkness, this melancholy, as a potential ingredient in creativity. It wasn't just a negative thing.
Exactly. And Aristotle, the philosopher, he even wondered, why is it that all those who are outstanding in philosophy, poetry, or the arts are melancholic?
He actually said that.
Yeah, he did. It's in Problems 30.1, 953A10, 953B10. He even compared black bile to wine, saying it could inspire great things but also lead to instability.
Okay, that's a really vivid image. So we've got this link between melancholy and genius going all the way back to the ancient Greeks.
Right.
But it doesn't end there, right? What happened to this idea as we move into the Middle Ages?
Well, things shifted a bit. Melancholy took on a more spiritual dimension. It became associated with acedia.
Acedia, what's that?
It's a kind of spiritual apathy. Think of it as, you know how it feels when you just don't have any enthusiasm for anything?
I guess, yeah.
Well, but in a spiritual sense, it was often seen in monks who lived in monasteries and stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. Spending all that time in solitude and contemplation, I can imagine that could lead to some introspection.
Right. And maybe even some despair.
Okay, so how did this acedia actually manifest? What does it look like?
Well, we have these descriptions from a monk named Evagrius of Pontus.
What do you say?
He was a 4th century monk, and he listed acedia as one of the 8 evil spirits, like demons.
Really?
Yeah, he said it was a demon that would torment people who were, trying to find spiritual solitude.
Okay, that's interesting. What exactly did he say about it?
Well, he described this feeling of sorrow and restlessness that came with acedia. He said that those who were struggling with acedia, it made them feel like they were like exiles.
Exiles.
Yeah, and that they were just, overcome by grief and they didn't even really know why.
It's like there was this deep existential sadness.
Totally. And get this, he said that those who were struggling with acedia would try to seek solace in the company of others.
Oh, so they try to distract themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And also indulge in these fleeting pleasures. But even when they were surrounded by people, they'd still be, sighing. And as soon as the fun was over, they'd leave feeling even more sorrowful.
Wow. That is really sad. It's almost like, people today who are trying to escape, trying to distract themselves from some kind of deeper unease.
Right.
And it just ends up making them feel worse.
Exactly. It's like this prototype for that. So we've gone from black bile to this spiritual apathy, and now we're moving into the Renaissance.
And what happens to the idea of melancholy then?
Well, that's when things get even more interesting. We meet Marsilio Ficino, a Renaissance philosopher.
And he changed things up.
He did. Instead of focusing on lethargy and darkness, Ficino saw melancholy as a state of perpetual motion, like this feeling of heaviness.
Heaviness instead of lethargy.
Yeah, and he linked mental concentration with the force of gravity. He suggested that a melancholic person is intensely focused inward.
So instead of being withdrawn and passive, they're restless and preoccupied.
That's a really good way to put it. And this is a crucial step towards our modern understanding of melancholy. It's not just about sadness anymore. It's about a way of experiencing the world, and a way that Ficino thought could lead to brilliance.
So he still saw it as potentially linked to creativity.
He did. Okay, but here's where things get really interesting with the scientific revolution and the rise of modernity.
Because it changed everything.
It did. The scientific revolution just completely changed how we understood the universe and our place in it.
We were no longer at the center of a perfectly ordered cosmos.
Right. Suddenly we were adrift in this vast, infinite universe.
And I imagine that realization, that cosmic dislocation, had a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Faced with this boundless universe, individuals started to withdraw inward, like becoming preoccupied with their own internal world.
And that, I imagine, leads to a whole new kind of melancholy.
You got it. This one's called the Elizabethan malady.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
It's characterized by introspection, and self-doubt,
Oh, yeah.
and the sense of, existential unease.
So this is really where this modern idea of melancholy comes into play.
Exactly. It becomes a key characteristic of the modern individual, like the thinking person who's struggling with this rapidly changing world.
And it's right around this time that we get one of the most important texts on melancholy ever written, The Anatomy of Melancholy.
Ah, by Robert Burton.
Yes.
Such a fascinating work. Burton was a scholar and a physician, and he explored melancholy as a defining characteristic of modern life.
What a fascinating idea. So for Burton, it's not just external circumstances, it's about our minds.
Yes. He saw the imagination as this powerful force that could produce great creativity, but also despair.
Both.
Both. He argued that melancholy was rooted in this freedom of the imagination, its ability to think up things that maybe don't even exist in reality.
So our minds can be our own worst enemy.
In a way, yeah. And his work really influenced a lot of thinkers like Blaise Pascal.
That's right.
Pascal was deeply concerned with the religious side of melancholy.
That's interesting. I can see how that would tie in. What was his take on it?
Well, Pascal lived during a time of incredible scientific discoveries, but he was also aware of this spiritual void that could come with this new way of seeing the universe.
I can relate to that. It's almost like a paradox.
Mm.
The more we learn about the vastness of the cosmos, the smaller and more insignificant we can feel.
Exactly. That's what Pascal was getting at, this sense of smallness, this feeling of being lost in this infinite universe. It was a source of deep melancholy for him. He believed that we as humans are just driven by this desire for happiness.
But that this longing can never be fully satisfied by anything in this world.
That was his key insight. He saw this insatiable desire for happiness as evidence of our spiritual nature, a sign that we were made for something more.
So we're always searching for fulfillment in external things, but we're always aware of this deeper longing that can never be fully quenched.
Precisely. And in that space between our desire for happiness and the limitations of the material world, well, that's where melancholy sets in.
For Pascal, melancholy was a sign of our spiritual yearning, a reminder of our need for something that transcends the physical world.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how we've come all this way. We started with black bile, moved to this spiritual apathy, then a state of deep introspection, and now with Pascal, we see it as this reflection of our yearning for the infinite.
What a journey. And I'm guessing it doesn't end there.
It definitely doesn't. Moving into the 19th century, we encounter this new philosophical idea, romantic irony.
Okay, now that sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So picture it as a kind of defense mechanism against the heaviness of modernity. It's detaching from the world and playing with forms and meanings, but not fully engaging with them.
So like acknowledging the absurdity of everything, but not falling into despair.
Yeah, exactly. G.W.F. Hegel, the German philosopher, he described romantic irony as a way of preserving this sense of freedom, even when faced with all these limitations.
I'm sensing that Kierkegaard wasn't a big fan of this romantic irony thing.
He had some issues with it. He saw it as this intellectual game, a way of avoiding really engaging with life.
He wasn't buying into this detached, ironic perspective.
Not really. He believed that real meaning and fulfillment could only be found through really, truly engaging with life, even with all the uncertainty and pain.
So we've got this tension between the weight of modernity and this ironic detachment. Where does Kierkegaard fit into all this?
Well, Kierkegaard, he viewed modern society as this surface, a boundary between these two extremes.
Interesting.
He believed that modern life was all flux and distraction, that it lacked depth.
Right.
and that it created the sense of meaninglessness.
And that's reflected in a lot of the literature and philosophy from that time.
Oh, definitely. In his book, Two Ages, he actually critiques what he saw as the shallowness of the present age. He even uses the word chatter to describe the constant noise that fills modern life.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded with information and distractions, but none of it really nourishes us.
That's exactly it. He believed that we've lost touch with something essential, something that gives life meaning and purpose. And he argued that this is at the core of modern melancholy.
This is all so thought-provoking. So, if both melancholy and irony are inadequate responses to modernity, what's the alternative? What did Kierkegaard offer?
Now, this is where things get really interesting. Kierkegaard's answer takes us beyond the human.
Okay, I definitely need to hear more about this, but I think we're going to have to say that for part 2. What a cliffhanger.
I know, right? We'll pick up there next time.
Welcome back, everyone. Last time we were talking about how Kierkegaard saw modern society as this surface caught between melancholy and irony. He didn't think either of those really dealt with the depths of existence.
Right. And remember, he proposed this, well, kind of radical alternative, the religious sphere.
Okay, so I have to admit, when I hear religious, I kind of brace myself. It can get preachy, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Dogmatic. Was that Kierkegaard's style?
Not at all. He wasn't interested in, like, blind faith or strict doctrines.
Oh, okay. So not what I was expecting.
He saw faith as this radical leap, like a decision that goes beyond reason and logic.
So how did he see this religious sphere as an answer to those dilemmas of melancholy and irony?
Well, for him, it wasn't about finding easy answers or comforting beliefs. It was about confronting the paradoxical nature of existence itself.
Okay, that sounds pretty deep.
It is. He believed that choosing faith, embracing the unknown, was a way of breaking free from the limitations of, well, a purely human perspective.
So it's not about figuring it all out. It's about acknowledging the mystery,
Yeah.
the things we can't fully grasp.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Kierkegaard believed that confronting the limits of reason, that embracing paradox, could open us up to a whole new way of experiencing the world.
Makes sense. But how does that tie back to melancholy and irony? This seems so different from this idea of faith.
Well, he saw both melancholy and irony as coming from a refusal to really, truly engage with existence.
Okay.
Melancholy, it retreats into the self, gets lost in introspection. Irony, it detaches from the world, keeps things at a distance. But faith demands total commitment, a willingness to embrace the uncertainty, and even absurdity of life.
So it's a way of breaking out of those self-imposed limitations, those traps we get caught in.
That's exactly it. It's about surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
I'm starting to get it. This leap of faith sounds intense, though. Like, how do people actually make this move into the religious sphere?
Well, Kierkegaard actually had what he called stages on life's way. He believed we all move through different stages of existence, each with its own challenges.
It's like this journey of self-discovery, huh? Moving through different ways of being in the world.
Yeah, it is. He had 3 main stages: the aesthetic, the ethical, and, you guessed it, the religious.
Okay, those sound interesting. Let's break those down. What's the aesthetic stage all about?
The aesthetic stage, it's all about living for the moment, pleasure, gratification. It's the world of the senses, art, romance, all about new experiences.
So having fun.
Yeah, exactly. But Kierkegaard also saw the downside. He argued that constantly chasing pleasure can lead to boredom, even despair. It's like, when you're endlessly scrolling on your phone, always looking for that next little dopamine hit, never really satisfied, kind of like what Pascal was talking about.
That's a great comparison. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
So how do we break out of that cycle? What's the next stage?
The ethical stage, it's about making commitments, living by principles, taking responsibility.
So choosing to live by something more than just fleeting desires.
Yeah. And for Kierkegaard, this transition from the aesthetic to the ethical, it's really important. It's moving from a life that's all about me to a life that's about something bigger.
But even the ethical stage isn't the final stop, is it?
Right. For Kierkegaard, the ethical stage leads to something even bigger, the religious stage.
So it's like a stepping stone to the religious.
Yeah, you could say that. He saw it as a necessary foundation. But true fulfillment, he believed that could only be found in a relationship with the divine.
Okay, so that's where the leap of faith comes in.
Right. The religious stage is all about surrendering to something we can't fully understand, trusting in something bigger than ourselves.
So it's not about abandoning reason. It's more like acknowledging that reason has limits.
Exactly. It's about accepting that there are truths beyond what our minds can grasp.
Okay, so this is all starting to make sense. But where does creativity fit in? We started by talking about the mad genius, the link between creativity and mental illness.
That's a really good question.
How does that relate to all these stages and leaps of faith?
Well, Kierkegaard himself didn't really focus on creativity the way we understand it today.
Oh, okay.
But his work offers insights into what it means to be a genius, the challenges of, being an artist.
So how does he see the creative process? Did he think certain types of people were more creative? Like maybe people in one of the stages?
Remember how he saw modern society as a surface, all superficiality and distraction?
Yeah.
He believed that true individuality, true selfhood, could only come from deep, passionate engagement with existence.
Okay.
And that often meant confronting hard truths, wrestling with doubt and uncertainty.
You're saying that this kind of struggle, that it could lead to creativity. Like, it's not about wanting to be mentally ill, but about understanding that the creative process involves confronting those darker parts of being human.
You got it. Kierkegaard's own writing shows that. It's full of psychological insights, explorations of despair, examinations of what it means to be human. He wasn't afraid to explore the darker side of things.
And that's part of what makes his work so powerful.
Exactly. So you could say Kierkegaard's own life embodies that whole mad genius archetype.
Yeah, I can see that. He was brilliant, but definitely struggled.
Yeah, and his insights into, the nature of existence, the challenges of being a person, the power of faith, they're still relevant today.
So it sounds like Kierkegaard doesn't give us a simple answer about creativity, but his ideas about the religious sphere, the leap of faith, it's a path toward a more authentic way of being, right? One that maybe could unlock creative potential.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. From ancient Greece to Kierkegaard's philosophy. What are the main things you think listeners should remember from this part?
First, that this idea of melancholy, the whole mad genius thing, it's been around for a long time. It's not just a modern idea.
It evolved with our understanding of ourselves and the universe.
Right. And I also think Kierkegaard gives us a really valuable perspective on what it means to be an artist today. Like, he saw modern society as a place where melancholy and irony thrive.
And his answer was to embrace the religious sphere. Take that leap of faith.
Right. Now, this doesn't mean everyone has to become religious, but it suggests that there's something about facing the unknown, about accepting paradox that can be really freeing.
It's like opening ourselves to something bigger than ourselves.
You got it.
All right, listeners, we've given you a lot to think about, but there's one last piece we need to explore. Kierkegaard's idea of reduplication.
Oh, yeah, reduplication. That's a fascinating concept.
Well, we'll save that for part 3.
See you then.
Welcome back, everybody. We've been on quite a journey with Kierkegaard, haven't we?
We have.
Exploring melancholy and irony.
Right.
And that leap of faith.
That was a big one.
Now we're getting to, well, what might be the most interesting idea yet. Reduplication.
It's definitely a core concept for Kierkegaard, and it kind of brings everything together.
I got to be honest, that word itself, reduplication, that sounds kind of intimidating. Can you break it down for us? What did he actually mean by it?
Basically, it's about transforming our existence, like seeing our lives, our experiences through a religious lens.
So it's not just about like believing certain things or going to church. It's about a deeper change in how we see the world.
Exactly. It's about experiencing the world like through the eyes of faith, letting faith shape how we understand everything.
That sounds really profound, but also, I don't know, kind of abstract. How does this actually work? How do we reduplicate our existence? Did he give us a how-to guide?
We thought it started with recognizing our own limitations. Admitting there are things we just don't understand, things beyond reason.
So starting with humility.
Yeah.
Accepting that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah. It's a different way of thinking, especially in today's world, right? We're always looking for certainty and control.
Right.
And from this place of humility, we open ourselves up to a relationship with the divine. We embrace that paradox of faith, that leap beyond logic.
So reduplication is tied to that leap of faith we talked about. It's surrendering to something bigger, even if it challenges how we think.
Exactly. Trusting in something that's beyond our understanding.
Okay, I see the bigger picture.
Right.
But how does this actually change our lives? What does it mean to see everything through the eyes of faith?
Kierkegaard described it as like becoming a new creature,
Yeah.
shedding our old selves and embracing a new identity that's rooted in faith.
So it's a transformation, a rebirth.
You could say that. It's about aligning a will with the will of God. letting those divine principles guide our actions and our choices.
And you're saying this leads to a new way of experiencing the world.
Right. Instead of being driven by, our selfish desires, anxieties, that need for control, we're open to a different kind of motivation, a different kind of fulfillment that comes from, living in harmony with something bigger than ourselves.
We're not looking for happiness in things anymore. It's about something deeper.
Yeah, reduplication's about finding our true selves in relation to God.
Okay, this is all clicking now. But how does this all connect back to that mad genius idea? The connection between creativity and mental illness. We've come a long way from that.
It's a great question to bring it back around. Remember how we said melancholy and irony are responses to how complex modern life is?
Right.
Kierkegaard saw reduplication as another way to deal with all that, but instead of retreating or detaching.
It's about engaging with the world in a different way.
Yes. And he believed that this engagement, this commitment to changing the world through faith.
It could be a creative force.
Exactly. He believed real creativity came from a deep connection to the divine, being willing to surrender to something bigger and let it, work through us.
That's a really powerful idea. So it's not about, seeking out mental illness or thinking suffering is romantic to be creative?
No, not at all.
It's about finding inspiration and purpose that goes beyond our human limits. And you're saying reduplication is a way to access that.
You got it. It's like the ultimate solution to those traps of melancholy and irony. It's about, embracing everything about existence, even the paradox and uncertainty.
Finding meaning and connection to the divine.
Exactly. And for Kierkegaard, that was the key to unlocking real creativity.
Wow, we've really been on a journey with this one. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Kierkegaard and this whole mad genius idea, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember?
I think it's to remember that creativity isn't a simple equation. There's no easy explanation. It's a really personal process. And it's often mysterious. It's different for everyone.
And while the link between creativity and mental illness is complicated,
Very.
what we've learned from Kierkegaard suggests that it's not about, romanticizing suffering or seeking instability.
Definitely not. It's about recognizing that being creative often means dealing with those difficult parts of the human experience, those doubts and uncertainties.
And finding a way to turn those experiences into something meaningful.
And for Kierkegaard, that meaning was connected to something divine.
His concept of reduplication, while challenging, it really makes you think about the power of faith.
It does.
It can change our lives, inspire creativity, and even help us find purpose in a world that can feel, pretty meaningless.
I agree. It's a powerful idea that can help us see our own creative journeys in a new light.
Well said. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about Kierkegaard, we really recommend Harvey Ferguson's book, Melancholy and the Critique of Modernity, Søren Kierkegaard's Religious Psychology.
It's a great book, even if it's a little tough to read sometimes.
Okay, listeners, that's it for this episode of the Mad Genius Thesis. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great exploring all these ideas with you.
Keep those questions coming, folks. Keep exploring, keep creating. Until next time.